So, welcome to this fourth webinar organized by the DigitAF project. The agenda is as follows. I will first give you a first introduction of the project and the different tools that were produced in the project. And then Bert, who is here, sorry, we did not present ourselves. Bert here will present some general principle to get you up to speed on what criteria are needed to choose correctly tree species for agroforestry systems. And then he will also present Dentro, one of such tools. And then I will present agroforestry advice, a tool that combines different tree selection tools. Then it will be back to Bert to present the tree species choice in a changing climate. And finally, Marilyne will talk more about the tree management. So before we will talk about tree choice and system design, and she will continue with the management of trees in agroforestry systems. And we will have the time for questions and answer at the end. So we won't stop for questions during the presentation. We keep them all for the end. Please disable your camera and most importantly your microphone when you are not talking in order to avoid unnecessary disturbance and noises. The meeting is recorded, so if you do not wish to appear, you just have to disable your microphone and camera. And I need to hide this. Yes. And also, please do not use AI assistants, because since the meeting is recorded, you will have all the convenience to read the slides and listen to the presentations. So, without further ado, let's start with the first introduction. So DigitAF is a European project, Horizon Europe project, aiming at developing, improving, testing digital tools to help agroforestry meet climate, biodiversity, and farming sustainability goals. The project was really user-oriented with three groups of target groups of stakeholders. First, policymakers who set the scene for agroforestry, for the adoption or not of agroforestry. Then practitioners of agroforestry in the field, so farmers, landowners, foresters who actually implement agroforestry. And finally, beneficiaries of agroforestry products and services who give value to agroforestry. And we had different work packages organized around each of these target groups. Our approach was thus user-centered, and we also favored open source software, trying to develop a distributed approach. So instead of having one big software doing everything, we developed different pieces of software, each with its own objectives, and worked on the interoperability to make them interoperable and be usable together. And therefore, we also embrace the FAIR principle. So FAIR is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These are principles that guided the development of our software. We also worked around living labs. So our stakeholders and end users were gathered in living labs in 6 different countries: the Czech Republic, Finland, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and the UK. And in those living labs, we had indoor meetings to collect information, to test the tools, to train the users in these different tools. And we also had outdoor meetings to discuss technical aspects of agroforestry, discover new systems, and share among stakeholders. We started first by doing an initial survey to identify and prioritize the needs of the user to prioritize our work. So we had 92 respondents in the 6 living labs, and we identified gaps of knowledge and the needs in terms of digital tools. And you can see the results published in a paper in Agroforestry system. And these results showed that for the obstacle, the problems that the users faced, we had, so they are ordered by descending order. So at the bottom, it's the most important problems. Lack of knowledge regarding the management of trees, and in particular from the workers, agricultural workers. And so Marilyne will present tools to meet these needs. There are also economic obstacles. The large investment, for example. So we won't cover this today. There was a specific webinar on financial tools for economic assessment of agroforestry systems that you can look at in the DigitAF website, and administrative obstacles, and in particular the administrative burden. And for that, we also did some work. And when looking at the need for digital tools, the stakeholder reported a need for specifically tree species or variety selection tools. It was the one that has the highest perceived usefulness for a potential digital tool, and quite a low reported knowledge of existing tool. And that was surprising for us, and that's why we started a special working group on tree species selection that will be presented later. So as I said, the DigitAF project was centered around digital tools, but it's not, so it's decision support systems, for example, but it's also data sets. And we also added some projects, and we made a catalog of these tools that is available on DigitAF website. And currently we have 53 decision support tools, 39 datasets, and 80 projects regarding agroforestry that are listed in the catalog. The tool catalog can be filtered by primary purpose, research, education, training, by type of user, like farmer, policymaker, farm advisor, etc. But also by step in the agroforestry journey. Is it to learn more about agroforestry as before taking the step, or is it about designing the actual agroforestry system, a future agroforestry system, planting the system, managing the system, assessing its performance, predicting future performance, or understanding detailed mechanisms, and these are more for research purposes. And you can also filter the tools by component taken into account, like animals, crop, tree, soil, etc. And each tool is rated in terms of fairness to know, well, to give a score of this findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of tools. And when you click on a given tool, you access its fact sheet with a link to the tool itself, a link to the manual, and some details about what is taking into account, what is included in it, and if there is a demonstration video, a link to or even the demonstration video embedded in the fact sheet. Just another useful catalog that you can find on the website is the Agroforestry Gallery. It's a gallery of more than 400 open source agroforestry pictures that you can use for your presentation, or just to look because they are nice. And I wanted to tell you that because you can, it's an open participatory gallery. You can add your own photos by clicking on the add photo. And if you upload pictures before May 15th and you click on I want to participate, you can participate to an agroforestry photo contest whose results will be presented during the IRAF conference, and you can find more on this link. A last word about the different webinars that were organized by DigitAF. They were organized by topic, and they were the results of the working group on these different topics. So one on carbon farming, one on financial tool, one on tools for biodiversity and soil health, and today on tree selection and tree management. And all of these tools are available in replay on DigitAF website. You can access them through the news section. So that's all for the DigitAF introduction. And now I give the floor to Bert to talk dive into our topic today of tree species selection.
Thank you very much, Marie, and good morning, everybody. I will share my screen. Marie, apparently now I need to send a request. I cannot share anymore directly.
Now you can, I guess.
Now I can. Okay, you should be seeing my presentation now.
Yes, it works.
Okay, good. I'm going to dive for the coming 10 minutes a bit into the theoretical background and the general principles which are relevant when choosing appropriate species for tree species in an agroforestry context. I guess for several of you that will be a bit knowledge you already have, but still we think it's relevant to really stress on these principles because they are really important to follow, and yeah, like a repetition is never bad as well. So when introducing trees into an agricultural systems, and that's what we do in agroforestry systems, you also introduce a lot of new dynamics. Yeah? The trees themselves need to fit into the system where you position them, but they will also trigger changes in microclimate, like changes in wind dynamics, changes in rainfall distribution patterns, changes in light availability. So these aspects will also influence the other components of your system, whether it is crops or livestock, for example. It will generate new products and new services. It will have an impact on the biodiversity of the system. And of course, you want to have an impact on the positive, on the functional diversity. So a lot of changes are triggered. And what's really different from planting a tree in a forestry context is that in an agroforestry system, you introduce trees in a system which has other productivity components in an agricultural system. So that makes the whole process of thinking which species really fits different from choosing a tree species in, for example, a plantation or a forestry context. That's quite obvious. It means that if we want to make good choices for a successful project, we aim at healthy trees, productive trees, preferably with a management burden which is not too high for the farmer, so it's feasible to manage the system in combination with the other components, and it should result in a sustainable, in a productive system in the end. So what choices do I have to make? And in fact, that's the designing of an agroforestry system is a whole process, and we're not going to tackle all the aspects of that design today. Of course, we're focusing on tree species choice, layout, and then management in the webinar of today. But just to give you a bit of an overview, planning or developing an agroforestry system demands time. You develop a plan step by step, and you really need to take time to inform yourself, to check all the choices, because this is something you will install for a longer period. It means you need to think about the space you have and the time you have available, not only for installing the system, but also for managing, for harvesting afterwards. You also need to think about the relationship of the tree towards the other components, the other crops, the livestock, which one is more dominant, which one is more important, what do you want to keep in mind? And that makes that every situation is really different. You need to make a proper choice of a tree species, but in many situations, next to that, it also means making a choice in terms of the right varieties of that species, the right cultivars, maybe for fruit or nut trees, the right rootstock on which the tree variety is grafted, and the type of planting material you want to use, and so on. So it doesn't end with choosing a species. There are a lot of other aspects regarding the planting material to think about. And then you also need to think about how many trees will I install? What will be the layout of the trees I will plant on the parcel, on the plot I am working? What machinery should be easy to move around on the plot? What other cultivation aspects? What's the shape of the plot, and so on? And very important, and I will stress it different times because it's often underestimated or a bit forgotten when designing a system. You really need to think in the long term about what it requires in terms of management, in terms of pruning, water provision, protection of the trees, and that also makes that certain tree species choices are affected by the possibilities, by the capacities you have in that respective. And then beyond that, but that's not going to be the topic of today, it's also about managing the strip under the trees. It's about other cultivation measures you take on the plot, like tillage, fertilization, and so on. And in a specific context, you also need to take into consideration the legislation, the regulations, maybe subsidy conditions or prerequisites if you are aiming at a certain subsidy. So these are things to take into account. When it comes to the actual tree species choice, there are a set of key principles which are listed here. And in the next slides, I will go through them more in detail. But this is like, again, a step-by-step approach. You need to see it as a kind of funnel. You start from a wide range of potential tree species, and then you narrow down step by step to see what really fits in your context. And actually, you don't start by saying, for example, I want to produce hazelnuts. Of course, many people have something specific, a certain product in mind, but you need to step back and first look at other aspects. You start, in fact, by looking at the ecological compatibility. What is compatible in the system, in the context in which I'm operating? What will be the functional role of the trees in the system? How about the complementarity with other components, and so on? And then you, in one of the following steps, you will come to the products you will gain. But you need to step back first. So we start with ecological compatibility. That means you need to see for the spot where you are working, what's the climate suitability of optional or potential tree species which I'm thinking about. Does the species I'm thinking about matches the temperature extremes, potential frost risks, rainfall patterns of that place, the microclimate, because you want to, of course, ensure survival and a steady growth of your tree. And the challenging thing, but that will come later also in this webinar, is that the future in this perspective is quite unpredictable and fast changing. So that's a challenging, more and more a challenging thing, of course, in choosing a climate suitable tree species. Then there's also the soil compatibility. You need to align species choice with the local soil conditions, the texture, the pH, nutrient availability, potential salinity of the soil, the groundwater levels, and fluctuation of these groundwater levels. So again, that the trees can establish quickly and need fewer inputs. Here, there are a couple of components which, through management, you can adapt or play around with, but some aspects are difficult to change or by humans, by the farmer. So you need to align your species choice to that context again. Quite related to that, water interactions, root interactions. If you are on a rather dry spot, you need to choose drought-tolerant species. If you are on a wet spot, moisture-demanding species will be more appropriate. And you will combine with other components that might be other crops, arable crops, vegetables, maybe other trees and shrubs, whatever. You want to choose species which are complementary in terms of rooting depths so that you avoid competition with the crop in terms of water availability, in terms of nutrients, and so on. Another aspect which also relates to this ecological compatibility is to choose for native or non-native tree species. Of course, in general, we favor native species. They are more resilient. But we need to take into consideration more and more climate change dynamics. But if you consider non-natives, then choose non-invasive and ecologically compatible tree species. Again, since future conditions are somehow uncertain and you want to reduce the risk or at least spread the risk, it can be interesting to have to diversify a bit tree species choice, variety choice, and maybe add some experimental species just to see how they perform and to spread the risk. Another aspect is the functional role in the system. So trees might have different functions beside the products they can generate in the long term or the shorter term. And that can be shade provision, wind breaks, nitrogen fixation, nutrient pumping, providing habitat for wildlife, and so on. And this again, if you have a particular interest for one or more of these functions, then this also affects the tree species choice. For example, if you want to have shade provision as an important aspect, then fast-growing species with a broad, dense canopy are preferred. If you want to realize a windbreak, then of course, again, fast-growing species for a fast result. But dense vertical structures are important. For example, the picture in the middle might be okay to provide shelter to the livestock, but this is not a tree structure you want to have as a windbreak. It's far too open, it's pruned very high. Complementarity with other components, that means that's a lot about light and shade, and matching canopy traits like the dimension of the canopy, the density of the canopy to the crop light needs, avoiding too much shade and light competition. Again, it's about root interactions with a preference to deep-rooted trees if you want to reduce water and nutrient competition and favor optimal use of resources in general in the system as a whole. It also means that you check sometimes some species might produce inhibitory compounds, like the walnut species, especially black walnut, which produces euglon, that can suppress crop growth of other crops, and that's something you want to avoid. In silvopastoral systems with animals, you want to find the right balance between probably providing fodder or shelter for the animals, but in the same time protecting young trees from browsing or rubbing. That also has to do with the complementarity with the other components. And in this perspective, also phenology and seasonality is important. When we look at the light availability, for example, and you see here an example for winter wheat. Winter wheat has a growing season which doesn't overlap too much with most of the trees in terms of leaf shedding and shade they provide. So you need to look for a good match with the crops you have. In terms of economic value and productivity, then revenue timing is important. Do you aim for maybe a long-term return on investment? So you want to produce maybe timber, high-quality wood, or do you rather aim at a short-term return, annual cash flow? Then fruit species, nut species, berries might be more appropriate, of course. Trees can also result in cost savings. Fodder trees can reduce the cost for feed for animals. You can reduce the cost of fertilization with nutrient pumping trees or trees that fixate nitrogen. So this is also an economic aspect to take into consideration. And then whatever product you generate, you need to check whether there's a market fit. Is there a local demand for the product you want to generate? Is there access to processing if that is needed? Or do you maybe intend to do the processing yourself? What is the variability in the unpredictability in terms of the product price? And also here, manageability comes into sight. What is the cost and the labor needed for pruning, for pest control, for harvesting, for maybe specific equipment you need? These are important aspects as well. Further about management requirements, again, I repeat that you need to align the species with the capacity of management you have. How much labor do you have available? And not also only in general, but also in specific periods of the year. Are there like peaks on your farm where you need a lot of labor? And how does that coincide with the labor needs for the tree component, for pruning, for harvesting? What is the growth rate of the system? And also related to management machinery and harvest moment compatibility are important. So then we also come to the design, like what row spacing should I respect in order to make sure that machinery can pass? Is there no risk of root suckering for certain species? How about branch brittleness? You don't want a lot of small branches or twigs maybe in the harvested vegetables or the other crop components. Then we come to the principle of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Of course, agroforestry systems can provide quite a lot of services like pollination. I'm almost coming to the end, Marie. Pollination, natural pest control, carbon storage, soil regeneration, water regulation, and so on. And again, with tree species choice, you can play around a bit with that. General principle is that diversity amplifies services. You can intentionally combine complementary species and use space and time in all dimensions to amplify diversity and hence ecosystem services of your system. Certain functional traits also will drive the outcomes you are aiming for. If you want to attract pollinators, then of course flowering or fruiting trees are interesting. If you want to create habitat, you want a good variety in canopy layers. For carbon sequestration and an improved soil structure, you need deep roots and so on. Feasibility is one of the last steps. So this is already the funnel narrowing down very much. You already have considered a lot of principles, but then there are some practical aspects, maybe like the availability of the specific species or the variety you are aiming for. Maybe certain pests and diseases, like ash is a very interesting tree species, but ash dieback might result in not choosing the species to avoid a high risk in terms of disease. And there's the cost of installation and management, of course. These are the main principles for tree species choice, step by step. And then you come to system design and spatial planning, which means you also have to think about orientation, spacing and access, density and light distribution in the system. These are aspects I covered already a little bit. It means making a choice between north-south orientation of tree rows or east-west, but there might be other reasons why you go for a certain orientation. It can have to do with the slope, for example, with the plot shape, with dominant wind direction, and so on. These are all aspects which influence design choices in terms of orientation, spacing, and so on. One of the last aspects I want to cover is that an agroforestry system is a dynamic system. It evolves over time. So you also initially, when you are planning, you need to consider that this is not a static thing. The trees will grow, the system will evolve, and you can also play around with temporal dynamics. You can plan for staged thinning of the trees. So maybe you you start with a higher density and then you remove some trees over time. The crop rotation, as the other component, might also evolve when light competition becomes increasingly important, for example. Or as you can see on the picture on the right, you can also go in tree rows for a multistrata system combining upper and lower canopies to boost productivity and to boost also diversity. Okay, so far for a bit of theoretical background and making sure that we are all aligned in terms of the principles to consider for tree species choice. And these principles are also behind most of the tree species selection tools, most also digital decision support tools, and we will present a couple of them today. Go in one or other way, stepwise, through these principles which are important. I will briefly present a first example of such a digital decision support tool for tree species selection, and that's Dentro. It's a tool we developed for the context in Belgium, but it has a wide range of tree species included, over 300. So it's quite generally valid. But of course, yeah, you need to always, it's a tool. It helps you as a kind of support, but you also always need to see what is my local context. After using the tool, you always need to check with a local tree nursery, with an expert, to see, okay, I have made some preliminary choice. Does that really fit in my context here? I'm not going to explain the tool myself. I'm just going to play a demo video, which lasts about 5 minutes. I hope the sound will be okay. Marie, if you maybe could just confirm if you hear the sound and if you now already can see the other interface.
Yeah, I see the video, but it's not moving.
Okay, and I will start playing it now. Can you
and
hear
the
it?
sound work, yes.
Okay.
Welcome to this demo video on Dentro. Dentro is a tree species selection tool that can help you choose trees and shrubs for your new agroforestry project, enabling you to select the most suitable species for your specific situation. So with Dentro, you can filter based on relevant plot characteristics, climatic conditions, production goals, and other factors that are relevant. In the end, your selection is easily summarized in a report that you can save for later. So where can you find Dentro? Well, on our...
I'm going to briefly interrupt. We tested before, Martin, and we cannot raise the volume. Unfortunately, this is the maximum. So I hope everybody can raise their own volume, and I hope it's okay to hear the sound more or less. If it's really an issue, you can put it in the chat, but I'm afraid we can't really improve it.
For Forestry Planner, there are certain tools, and the first one is Dentro. Here is the home page where you can find a description and also a button to go to the tool. The tool consists of two options. So you can have the beginner's version, where the app guides you in finding suitable trees, where we have some pre-selected filters. And there is also an option, like more an expert mode, where you can use an extensive array of filters to select trees by yourself. So let's start with the beginner's option. Here you can see a green box with a question. And below there are some options you can click on. So this helps you to quickly filter on the relevant questions. So the goal could be fruit trees. You can be looking for trees. Do they need to be endemic? Well, you can choose, and if you don't know or you have no preference, you can click here. So I will quickly choose some options. And in the end, you have a list of species that are according to your options possibilities. So if you want to select all of them, you can click here. If you only want to select a few, you can click here. For now, I will click all of them. And then I go to this button, Go to List. Here I will find a summary of the simulation that I just did. And I can also generate it as a report with this button. Or if I want to edit my list, I can go back. But let's generate a report for now. Here you will see that all your tree species have little cards, and there's like the parameter that you selected and also the answers to them. You will also find some like attention points regarding diseases and invasiveness of the species, also regarding climatic conditions, and if it's eligible for the agroforestry subsidy in Flanders, and a disclaimer. So that's the end of the beginner version, and then I can also go to the expert version, which is of course a bit different. So here you already see all species, and here you find a button for the filter menu. If I click on it, you will see all parameters, and if I click on it, you can also again select the one that's most suitable for your field. Here you can also find something that was not in the previous beginner mode. This is the minimum score. So here you find a legend. A 0 means that the species is unsuitable, and a 5 means it's very favorable. So if you really want to make sure that the species are favorable for your conditions, then you can drag it to the 4. If you're really curious to find a specific species, you can also enter the name, and then it appears there to the left. Here you have the same buttons again, like the previous version. And here you can again click on a certain characteristics. Sometimes there is a specific legend to a certain parameter, and then there's this information button where you can have like this pop-up with an explanation of the legend. So 1 would mean a maximum height of 0 to 5 meters or 6 to 10 meters. So I can click on it, and then you can see that it's being processed on the left. I can view my results or clear filters. Well, let's view the results. And if I'm happy with my list, then I can select them all, or again a few. Green button, go to lists, and then it's the same as the previous, like the beginner mode, that everything is summarized, and again you can generate a report. All right, so here's again all summarized. So this was the tool. You can also find our support here in the demo video. If you have questions, or if you want to explore more tools that are in the tree selection atmosphere, then you can definitely check this out. Thank you for watching, and if you
have questions, you can ask them at the end of the webinar. Okay, I think over to you, Marie. I will stop sharing.
So if you can stop sharing, so I can share mine. And it's gone, it's here. Okay. Dentro was one example of tree selection tool, but actually there are several tools that were developed independently in different countries. And so our question were, is it possible to, instead of working separately, work together to create a working group to gather all tools in one place to help the users compare them and select the one most adapted to their needs, because they all have their own specificities. How to allow users to query all tools from a common interface. And is it even possible maybe to combine the underlying data to enrich the choice and provide more knowledge, and so generate more knowledge? So for that, for gathering all tools in one place, we worked in different directions. One, it's the DigitAF tool catalog that I already showed you, and you can find tree species selection tools by filtering by the step in the agroforestry journey, which is designing a future agroforestry system. So it's in the planning and design phase, and typing species in the search box, and you will find a number of these tools. And we also developed a specific page on the agroforestry advice tool, which I will present just after, that shows different countries where the tools were developed and used, and with a little info about each of those tools and the reference, the scientific reference. Then, to allow users to query all tools from a common interface, we built a unified tool called Agroforestry Advice. And so we took each tool and broke it down into one database, so the underlying data, the tree characteristics, one interface specifying which are the inputs and outputs from the user, and one model, which is the scoring algorithm to compute the tree score. And then a common interface where we can plug each of those different previously existing tools and query it through a unified user interface or through API request. Well, that's the objective. It's not completely working now. And for example, the common interface, it's a shiny interface where you can select your language and select the tool you want to use. So in this screenshot, there were only five tools. Now there are 10. So it's a work in progress. It's developing and increasing as we get knowledge about other tools, because each time I present it, I know people coming and saying, "Oh, okay, we are developing in my unit," or I know some technical institute or whatever who is developing a tree selection tool, and so we try to gather more and more data as time goes. So you select the tool you want, and then you describe on the left part your site, and on the right part your objectives, and then you click on compare trees, and you will get the trees that are present in the tool order either by adaptation to your site, or by, if you click here on efficiency, it will order the trees by order of efficiency at providing the objectives that you want. And for example, in this little example, you can see that the trees that are most adapted to your site are not the one that provide the best services compared to what you want. And you can also download the detailed scores. And so with this interface, actually, each tool keeps its own specificity, because you see here that there are screenshots of the different tools. They don't have the same criteria for describing the site and for describing the objectives, and they don't have also the same species. So each tool is independent, but once you know how to use one, you know how to use all, because they have a common, the same feel and look of the interface. And for some tools, we used the existing algorithm that was inside the tool. And for some, it was just a spreadsheet with tree characteristics. And so we developed a generic scoring mechanism to score automatically, to easily import a database of tree characteristics. And it automatically selects the adapted widgets, adapted buttons. Is it a drop-down menu? Is it boxes that you can click? Is it a numeric input, or numeric input in form of range, etc.? And so the URL query, it's already possible to pass parameters through the URL. So you can reselect the parameters you want. And for the really API, it's still underway. And for the next objective, which is combining the underlying data to enrich the choices, we have put all the criteria from these existing tools into one common framework, where we have on one side the constraints, the site characteristic and constraints of the farm at a different level, plot, farm, or more large socioeconomical level on one side. And on the other side, all the services that the trees can provide, from regulation services to provisioning, of course. And well, here it's just the top level view, but of course it's possible to develop all of these branches and get more details, because it's a hierarchy of criteria. And this hierarchy allows us to accommodate more or less detailed tools meaning some tools are very focusing on one specific these big boxes, and will give a very detailed, for example, if we look at, for example, shade, it will be shady conditions for some tools, so quite low detail, and for other it will be shade in the spring or shade whatever, something more or less detailed. And the trees are also in a hierarchy, which is not very innovative. It's just genera, species, and variety. So the content currently for the criteria, so here it's for 8 tools, but actually now there are 10. You can see that for these different adaptation or efficiency criteria, each tool has a different level of focus, of specification. For example, some tools, all tools have at least something about soil and climate, but some are much more detailed in terms of regulation and maintenance for providing ecosystem services. For example, the shade tree advice is focusing specifically on that, and other tools have more specificity on the type of products that can be provided, for example. And the tools also differ in terms of number of species or varieties that are included. And usually the more species, the less details there are about them. So for example, this model is just about soil and climate adaptation. And so there are a lot of species, and some are more focusing on more detailed criteria on workforce availability, and there are less species or varieties. And for the last objective of generating new knowledge, it's something that we are into it now. I don't have results yet. So hopefully we'll be able to infer missing information in one database from information in other database by looking at the overlap between database, or at least identify knowledge gaps. And for example, what you would see from the previous slides is that not many tools include effects of tree species on biodiversity. So it's something that we need a further research to complete this knowledge gap. So you can test the prototype on this link. It's free, it's open, even open source. So you can also look at the code and send bug reports or send me an email directly. And what we are currently doing is adding new databases. So the UK tree guide, well, actually it's done already. It's in the beta version. The Swiss tree database, which is already in this beta version. So on this link, it's the beta version. On this link, it's the most stable version. And also French timber, tree soil and climate adaptation, etc. So if you have knowledge of tree characteristic databases usable for tree species selection, please inform me. And also the tool is open source, which means under MIT license, which means anybody can fork the branch and fork the repository and develop their own branch. And for example, the Czech colleague have developed their own branch with more details on the Czech legislation, and they have improved the interface by adding info bubbles, and you can test the tool on this link. And hopefully soon we will bring back the improvement they made to the main branch. If you want to know more, you can look at a publication in Agroforestry System Journal. You can come, if you are in the INRAE conference in next June in Neuchâtel, you can come and look at the poster about the Czech branch of the tool. And you can also come to test the tool by yourself. There is a workshop allowing hands-on demonstration and testing of agroforestry tool for different topics that will also take place at IRAF. And so now I give the floor back to Bert.
Yes, thank you, Marie. And I see I need to check for the Dendrobe tool since it was mentioned 69 tree species included in agroforestry advice, while now we have over 300 species, so we need to check if we have the most updated match. Okay, I will share again my screen. Okay, you can see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah. So while in the beginning I presented a bit the general principles on tree species choice, it was already clear that future is unpredictable, and in a changing climate, tree species choice becomes more challenging. And with this part of the presentation, we want to dive a bit into some specific points of attention in that perspective. So the context is quite clear. The tree species selection requires more and more a future-proof approach. We don't only select species because they fit right now in our system, but we also need to think ahead of how things will change and how things will evolve to have a climate resilient, site-specific tree species selection. And that means that we are operating in a context with increasing weather extremes, with prolonged heat waves, prolonged droughts, periods of intensive rainfall, very long wet periods, which are actually already affecting tree performance right now. And the most vulnerable areas in general are urban areas, but also agricultural landscapes where soil compaction and a lack of buffering in an open context are present. In that sense, most forests have a better microclimatic condition, can cope better with extremes, but yet there's also huge concern about the performance and the dieback of even native forest species. I think this takes place all over Europe. It's certainly the case in our country as well. So it's quite what makes it quite challenging is that if you would have to choose a species for a stable extreme situation, like always wet or always dry, you can aim for species which are adapted to that context. But the thing is that on the same place, we have a range of extremes. So we can have an extreme drought in the one year and then a very wet year with a very high groundwater level in the following year. So that's what makes it extremely challenging. So indeed, weather extremes mean that we have more extreme fluctuations in groundwater levels, and in soils which are permanently wet, of course, trees will develop a shallow rooting system. But since periods of waterlogging become longer and longer, even for species adapted and having a shallow root system, we see root mortality taking place due to oxygen deficiency. And on the other extreme, given drought events from time to time, if the groundwater level drops below this shallow root zone, we have a rapid decline also in the vitality of the tree species, of the trees. So what I said before, species thriving under stable, but for example, wet conditions like willow or poplar or black alder, they cannot cope with the newly emerging, very, varying situations and the dry phases we also have. So we need dual tolerance. And maybe not everything what I'm going to say is valid all over Europe, for example. So it's a bit focused on the situation in our country, but I think the principles are generally valid. You will also give later in the slides that I give some examples of fit tree species. Again, this might not be the right species for your context and your country. It's an example from the Belgian situation, but still the principles hold. And so dual tolerance means we need to have species that can tolerate very wet winters or autumn and very dry spring or summers. Species that need to tolerate both waterlogging and prolonged drought. And the soil texture might amplify that effect. Sandy soils, which have a low water holding capacity, for example, can exacerbate the drought stress, while on loamy soils and clay soils, soil moisture is buffered more effectively, and so that's a more favorable situation then. Location also matters. Even on a short distance, a forest is different from an urban area, from an open agricultural area. What you see on the map in the right corner is an aerial photograph of the city of Ghent, where you see at the very same moment, mid-April, 9:30 in the evening, temperatures raising up to 24 degrees in the city center, while at a very short distance in the open agricultural area just outside the city, the temperature at the same moment is only 16.7 degrees. So this aspect of heat accumulation in cities, and so the specific location is important. In urban areas, you also have soil sealing, limited rooting space, so that poses severe stress on trees. While forests have a more favorable microclimate in general, a higher soil porosity, a better infiltration, so they can cope better with extreme weather events, with buffering water, and so that helps helps the trees to cope better. Agricultural fields, and that's of course where we are operating with agroforestry, are in general quite vulnerable due to the open exposure and occasional soil compaction, for example, that limits water infiltration capacity and so on. But in the same time, that makes agriculture vulnerable, but also part of the solution to build a more buffered environment, a less open exposure. So if we want climate resilient tree species selection, that means that in agroforestry planning, we should incorporate species adapted for fluctuating groundwater tables. And then there's a list of species which can be suited, but again, this is of course location dependent. You see poplar, oak, hawthorn, hornbeam, hazel, for example, as quite adapted to fluctuating groundwater tables, while others are not. In some situations, species for very wet soils that can be almost permanently up to the surface level. And then Alnus, Betula, Sambucus, Salix species, again, poplar species, Sorbus might be suitable in that context. Or it can be that this groundwater level goes no lower than 30-40 centimeter, and then again, other species come into perspective. So species for very wet soils, but also species with a demonstrated drought and heat tolerance. And again, some examples are listed here. So these are the types of things to think about, to incorporate in agroforestry planning. Other key principles beside the specific tree species which fits the condition is that, again, when it comes to varieties, cultivars, genotypes, or the provenance of the planting material, that genotypes or provenance with a demonstrated drought tolerance or a demonstrated waterlogging tolerance are important to consider. And also here, as a general principle, diverse mixtures means that you reduce the risk, that you spread the risk. Besides looking at the tree or the planting material, of course, there's also some things you can do on the plot, on the site. A proper site analysis is of course important to know what is the soil type, what are historical water regimes, so that you can better match species to the specific field conditions. And in the next step, you can also think about what remediation measures or adaptive measures can help to cope with the situation. How can I alleviate compacted layers on the field? Can I attribute mulch or apply organic material in another way to reduce evapotranspiration? Maybe beetle banks are an interesting adaptive measure to consider, because by creating a bit of a higher mound on which you can plant the trees, you can maybe already affect a bit the waterlogging situation. So these are adaptive measures you can consider. Another aspect I briefly want to introduce is the aspect of assisted migration, or a more flexible definition. It's at least something to reflect upon on native species. Of course, if climate evolves, also the natural dispersal of trees will evolve to other regions, but climate change is going faster than the potential natural dispersal of trees, and the recolonization following the last ice age is even not yet complete. It means that something to think about is to actively introduce genetic material from native species, but coming from different regions of origin, actively introducing them, or introducing other species. In our case, for example, from Southern and Eastern Europe might be needed if you want to cope with the quickly changing climate. So something at least to reflect upon. I'm not giving an answer, a yes or a no to that, but maybe a more flexible definition and policy regarding native species is an important aspect. And just to give an example of assisted migration is the Interreg project Sorbus to the Rescue. Again, for our context in Belgium, Sorbus terminalis and Sorbus domestica might be an interesting alternative for what is going to be a climate loser, Sorbus occuparia, and for which assisted migration might be useful. The other two alternatives, terminalis and domestica, are non-invasive. They are not far away from us. They have very promising climate characteristic and a high economic value. So these are the kind of things we also need to dynamically think about. And this is my last slide, just a few logical, practical recommendations. There are quite some interesting sources of information if you want to, besides the tools, of course, the digital interactive tools which we present today, which can provide a lot of information on tolerance of species for climate parameters. Just a few examples. In Belgium, there is the Fichier Écologique, a Walloon source of information for which you see on the right down corner a screenshot for the tolerance of Acer campestre, for example. Climessence, a French source of information, which is also very interesting. Ecopedia in Belgium, and of course there are many more. What can also be interesting is to look at tree performance in arboreta or open air experiments, as they might be valuable indicators of how things are evolving and what fits a certain situation. So thank you. Back to now to Marilyne, I think.
Yes, thank you, Bert. I'm going to share my screen. Is it okay for you?
Yes,
Yes.
we can see it.
It's okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for organizing this webinar. My presentation will focus on the management of trees and more specifically on the resources and challenges related to tree management practices. The study was part of subtask 2.2.2 of the DigitAF project. It was conducted by Cécile Antin as part of a one-year postdoctoral contract. And the objective of Cécile's work was to assess the current state of resources and needs in tree management and to provide a qualitative assessment of agroforestry tree performances as perceived by stakeholders. So this study followed 3 steps. The first one was an inventory of existing tools, models, and resources. The second was the analysis of survey responses collected from the 5 DigitAF living labs. And the third step was a survey of French stakeholders in France. So I will present a synthesis of the results following this plan. So first, the diversity of stakeholders involved in agroforestry tree management. Secondly, the expectations regarding trees. Why do farmers plant trees? And then I will continue with the perceptions of tree performances by stakeholders. Then an overview of the available tools and resources, and finally, the identified needs and challenges. So I will start by briefly introducing the 2 surveys underpinning this study. So the first one was conducted at the European level as part of the DigitAF project. So within each living lab, a network of farmers and advisors was interviewed in 2023. So the top table shows the number of respondents by country and by stakeholder category. And the result of this survey were further explored at the national level in France through a series of semi-structured interviews with 13 stakeholders involved in the development of agroforestry. So it chose to interview advisors, technicians, trainers, and researchers based on the assumption that this would enable us to aggregate and summarize the observations and needs of farmers at local, regional, or national levels, depending on their activities. So the interviews were conducted via video conference between October 2023 and February 2024. They were also used to complete the initial inventory of tree management of tools. So here the second table details the name of the structure interview, the type of stakeholder, and their geographical scope. So the first finding of this study concerned the diversity of stakeholders involved in tree management. So the interview showed that they depend on the management stage, the type of agroforestry system, and tree objectives. So we can see on this table that advisory structures play a key role from the design of the plot to post-planting monitoring, tree monitoring. We can see also that various stakeholders are involved in 3 key stages of the project, namely the design of the plot, the planting of the trees, and the maintenance of edges. By contrast, we can see that the pruning of within plot trees is carried out almost exclusively by farmers. The second finding of the surveys concerned the reason for planting tree. Most of the interviewees agreed that farmers had a fairly good knowledge of the various services that trees provide. Ecological services were cited more often than tree-related production services, except in the case of orchards and forest gardens. Timber production appears to be a very secondary consideration in recent plantations. Some of those interviewed suggested that open growing conditions present technical challenges that hinder the production of high-quality timber. This difficulty supports the idea that timber production could be restricted to forests. Some others recommend managing within plot plantations as hedgerows in order to facilitate timber production and improving the ecological services provided by trees. I will now present the results regarding perceptions of tree performances by stakeholders. While the planting stage is considered to be well mastered and giving satisfactory results, the management of the trees is considered to be very unsatisfactory. This observation is widely shared by the participants in the interviews and concerns all types of agroforestry, but for different reasons. The first problem concerns hedgerows. Current maintenance practices are considered to be incompatible with the good ecological status of hedgerows, and therefore with the production of the ecosystem services that might be expected of them. A second problem is specific to the objective of producing timber, whether for trees planted in rows within the plots or in hedgerows. The general lack of tree management in the first few years makes it impossible to produce quality timber. The interviews note either a complete lack of intervention or interventions that are too sporadic or too heavy. Furthermore, some of them point out that a lack of early intervention can subsequently lead to excessive maintenance using unsuitable tools in an attempt to control the spread of the trees. The consequences of inappropriate tree management are difficult to assess. in the absence of long-term monitoring data, it is difficult to evaluate the actual performance of agroforestries in relation to their initial objectives. So now just a look to the tools and resources available for tree management. Donc Cécile carried out an inventory of resources and tools which combine elements from the grey and white literature. She identified around 30 digital tools and models, as well as about 50 other resources like technical sheets, guides, and training material. We can see that numerous tools are dedicated to designing agroforestry system and estimating carbon stock. Conversely, few decision support tools are available for managing trees from planting to harvest. Most of the resources listed under tree management are guides, technical sheets, or training courses. A number of resources or databases have been produced by research projects in order to bring together scientific and technical knowledge related to agroforestry. However, feedback on these resources highlights that there are several shortcomings, including a lack of accessibility, too limited diffusion, and the complexity of certain content, inappropriate lengths, and insufficient simplification. However, and despite their usefulness being recognized, the creation of new digital decision-making tools is not seen as a major lever for improving tree management practices. A number of people pointed out that the tools exist but are not so widely used. There are many reasons for that: the lack of time, the lack of motivation, some apprehension about tools or practices considered to be too technical, a lack of access to tools, and sometimes unsuitable format. For some, there is even concern about the proliferation of tools, their complexity, and the fact that they are evolving too quickly. The two surveys have identified other obstacles to explain the poor management of agroforestry trees. Among these, the most often cited reason was the lack of knowledge about trees among the various stakeholders, whether it be farmers, advisors, local authorities, or contractors. The second most frequently cited reason is the lack of available labor, whether due to the lack of time of farmers or a shortage of service providers to carry out the work. Another challenge concerns the perception of trees. Sometimes they are seen as a nuisance to be minimized, or in the other extreme, as a symbol that speaks for itself and requires no specific management. Some other reasons have been cited, such as regulatory issues, the low value of tree products, an overlook of intraplot agroforestry compared to hedgerows. So this study provides insight into some challenges related to tree management. The first one is the importance to integrate teaching on trees, both theoretical and practical, into agriculture and agronomic training programs. Current training courses are very short, 1 or 2 days, and they don't enable farmers to become self-sufficient and skilled about tree management. The second one is to adopt a participatory research approaches. Interviewees would like stronger links with research, for example, on tree response to management practices, or response to climate change, on tree root development. There is a big asking for this thematic. And the third one is to set up a long-term monitoring program of agroforestry trees and practices to have a better evaluation and understanding of the ecological and economical performances of agroforestry systems. And at the meantime, it will seem relevant to extend the period of technical support for farmers. and at the research level to conduct a more in-depth analysis of the factors influencing management practices among the various stakeholders and in particular among farmers. And this is a research project of Juliette Picard, funded by the region Occitanie, which will be supervised by myself and by Julien Blanco, an ethno-ecologist in Montpellier, to go further, have a better understanding of the barriers in tree management. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marilyne. So if you can stop sharing your screen, I share mine. Actually, just for the last slide, because since we are developing that into the DigitAF projects, it's mandatory to mention the funding by European Union. And if you have questions, please, it's time to do so. You can just simply raise your hand or simply open your microphone to be able to ask your questions. So I see already a question in the chat. Are there tools incorporating genetic information and knowledge into agroforestry decision-making? Is there any dealing with strategical policy aspects like sustainable development goals, ecosystem restoration decade of UNEP, etc.? So it's actually two questions. One about the genetics of trees.
I don't know.
I just know one tool that is about the rootstock. So different types of rootstock, but it's not the genetics. So no.
No, I don't know.
Oh, the one on rootstock, I just shared the link in the chat. At least if this is the one you mean, Marie, but maybe it's still something else.
And deciduous too. There are two.
And deciduous, yeah. But
so
otherwise, also, I'm not aware of any
on the genetics and the genetic diversity. I know there were some things that were done by Frédéric Santi at INRAE on the genetics of trees for agroforestry, but I don't know what the results were. Marilyne, have you heard about the results?
No, I don't know. I don't know. It's our work now.
Okay, so sorry, no answer for that. And for the second part, tools specifically dealing with the sustainable development goals. I know there is a public good tools that has a very broad view on the different sustainability goals. But for the ecosystem restoration, I don't know. So if you are interested in sustainability evaluation, there is also tools that deal with the ex-ante evaluation of sustainability. For example, the DigitAF tool, which looks at different sustainability criteria, both agronomic, economic, and social. And in DigitAF, if you want to find tools working on the effect on biodiversity, for example, we are developing. The publication is in preparation. A tool evaluating ex ante the effect on biodiversity. So if you can add, Bert, also the DigitAF. Oh, right, already.
I did it. Yeah, I just did it.
Great.
And then there's a new question. Can we consider agroforestry to contribute to forest development?
Good question.
If the question would be if so what we presented right now, and Marilyne and Marie just add what your reflection on this, but what we presented more or less generally always starts from an agricultural context in which we introduce trees. it's true that the other way around, it can also work, that you start from a forestry context and then you introduce another component, having livestock in the forest, for example.
Which has just been authorized in Germany.
Okay, and what I wanted to say, in Belgium, it's not authorized. It's impossible to have any other agricultural activities in forests. But I'm not sure if that is what you mean, or if there's something else behind the question.
So, Ranhoa, if you want to specify your question, just looking at the question, I was in a research perspective, and I was thinking, does the knowledge that we create in agroforestry, can it be useful for forestry management? That's how I understood the question, but I don't know if it was the right.
Maybe not for management, but for the tree species choice, it can be useful can be possible to share knowledge.
But usually it's more the other way around. It's knowledge from forest that can be applied to agroforestry, because agroforestry is a newer field, and so they have a lot of advance in forestry research.
Yes, but forestry face the same challenges than agroforestry for the choice of species. So I think it can be some.
I think in terms of indeed species performance under more extreme weather conditions, agroforestry experience can be the kind of indicator of what we might be faced with in the future, also in forests.
Yes,
not sure.
Yes.
And there are some other questions.
Next question was, were the stakeholders eager and motivated to test tools? So for that, I can only answer from what I heard from the testing the living labs. They were very eager and motivated to test tools, but of course, they were not just some random farmers. They were farmers who were already involved in the living lab because they were interested in that. So it's not a general answer, but really the tool testing workshops had a big success in the living labs.
And just to complement to that, I think it depends a bit on the topic of the tools. But for sure, it's quite clear that there's a high interest of having decision support in terms of tree species choice, and beyond that, rootstock choice and so on. Farmers, of course, are not the only end users we are aiming at for the tools. It's also farm advisors, and linked to the DigitAF project, but also in the context of another Interreg project in which we are involved here. We are organizing a train-the-trainer program for advisors, and one of the sessions was on testing tools and getting their feedback. And for example, the tree species selection tool, there was a lot of enthusiasm from the advisors and future advisors.
Okay, there's another question about GMOs and hidden GMOs with different names, like what's in English, the unconventional genetic manipulation. I don't remember the name in English, whatever. And so is it a good way to face climate change, or is it a bad idea and against agroforestry and agroecology? So on GMOs, I don't have a very, it's not my domain, so I cannot give you a scientific opinion. But for agroecology, I think agroforestry should be part of agroecology and embrace the whole of the agroecological principle. In particular, non-reliance on external inputs, and GMOs are external inputs with highly strong dependence on a few companies, and so probably not compatible from a social perspective with the agroecological principle. But maybe my colleagues have other opinions to share.
I agree with that.
I also share that idea. I don't have enough scientific background to really have an a very in-depth opinion on that, but intuitively I fully agree, and I think we should embrace species variety, diversity, and also the agroecological social principles of autonomy and trying to reduce external inputs and external dependencies.
Any other question? Directly, now you can open your microphone and just ask your question. And thank you, Branislav, for your encouragements. So the webinar will be available on DigitAF website. And also I want to mention, if you don't know it already, that there is also a social platform that was developed in the Reforest project, which is the sister project of DigitAF. And it's a platform to exchange, to support stakeholder groups. And you can create in that you can create your own group and talk about agroforestry either with existing groups or in your own groups. Any other question or remark? Well, then we are perfectly on time. I was afraid at the beginning that we might do some overtime, but it's noon, and it's so I guess the end of this webinar. Thank you for following us, and thank you for your work on agroforestry. Agroforestry needs you. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marilyne.
Bye.
Thank you, Bert. Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.